Welcome to our History channel. History too real for the Westerns. Don't forget to click like, share, subscribe, ring that notification bell, and leave us a comment if you like this story. The term Native American is often used today as a placeholder for what's perceived to be a unified pre-European contact culture, whose differences were nominal and whose cultures were inherently symbiotic. But this is a woefully myopic approach, one that does not do justice to the individual dignity, history, and culture of the individual tribes who, long before and long after Europeans set foot upon the North American continent, lived in a complex, dynamic, and ever-evolving world of alliances, warfare, trade, migration, and yes, even conquest. Tonight is the first in our series on the individual tribes of the North American continent. And hopefully, at some point, we'll get to South America too. It's all good. We love them all. Their stories are equally important, their cultures and dialects distinct, and their impact on history incalculable. We will attempt to cover as many as humanly possible, from Chumash to Algonquin to Seminole to Arikara. Seeing as how this podcast is based in the Lone Star State, I figured we'd start there, with a tribe who may have shaped not just Texas, but the United States and Mexico more than any other. Their name struck terror across the Texas frontier for centuries, and they ran an empire to rival most any conquerors in history. Tonight, we cover the history of the fierce, proud, prolific, and Spartan-esque lords of the southern plains, the Comanche, often and certainly accurately portrayed as a war-driven and minimalistic society. The Comanche are and were far more complex, cunning, and ambitious than they have normally been given credit for in the annals of North American tribal histories. In this episode, we will seek to instill a true sense of the evolution of the tribe from foraging underdogs in the Teton Mountains to the greatest cavalry force and territorial powerhouse possibly on the entire continent throughout the majority of the 19th century. Their rise was awe-inspiring, their way of life was brutal, and their impact unforgettable. Join us for the Comanche. Texas, 1840s. A party of Texas Rangers and their native scouts, comprised mostly of Lipa and Apache, were following a raiding party of Comanche who had been wreaking havoc on the territory for weeks, torturing and killing settlers, burning homes and crops, killing livestock and making off with women and children as spoils of war. This party was hoping to find the Comanche, reclaim the captives they had taken, and kill or take prisoner as many of them as they could. As they made their way through the country, quietly trotting through a valley, a sudden piercing howl cut through the night air. This contingent of experienced trackers and gunfighters suddenly stopped, and their spines stiffened as the Lipa and Apache scouts strained their ears. Then came another howl. "Lobo," the Lipan said. All present breathed a sigh of relief, for even among those familiar with making war against the Comanche, perhaps especially for those familiar with making war against the Comanche, the possibility of being caught in one of their attacks was enough to chill them to the bone and make even the most resolute among them reconsider their resolve. From central Texas to Kansas, from Colorado to New Mexico, and everything in between, it all belonged to the Comanche. They were effectively an empire. They owned more horses, controlled more land, brought more violence, and conducted more trade than virtually any other tribe on the North American continent. But they had not always been so powerful. They had originated in the hills and high plains of Wyoming, a Shonan offshoot tribe who subsisted on hunting small game and foraging for roots and berries. Theirs was a hard and oblique existence. Neighboring tribes constantly ran them out of their territory, driving them further and further south along the Rockies. They regarded the Comanche with their short, squat bodies, and were not afraid of them. They were not good at agriculture. They were not adept in trade. They did not weave baskets or blankets, or construct pottery. They did not have a story of creation, nor did they have anything comparable to their neighbors in the way of spiritual practice or religious ceremony. In the highly stratified and contentious world of tribal hierarchies, theirs was as close to the bottom as one could get. But at some point in the mid-17th century, things would change. They would change drastically. It was during this time that the first horses brought by the Spanish to the vaunted New World began to make their way onto the southern plains. This would prove to be the flashpoint for the Comanches, for it was the Comanche who, for whatever reason, seemed divinely ordained in the ways of the horse. In the span of a few decades, they went from itinerant root-gatherers to minimalistic, lightning-fast and highly mobile war machines. Most on the plains adopted the horse either as a means of transport, an easy source of animal protein, or both. But no other tribe fought like the Comanche. The Comanche fought on horseback, unlike their counterparts to the north and south, who would indeed ride mounts to battle, but seldom fought from their horse. Accounts of travelers and settlers on the southern plains are replete with the riders' astonishment, not only of the ferocity of the Comanche attacks, but the skill and precision with which they were carried out. They developed a technique of effectively turning themselves into a human Gatling gun, in which they would ride in a giant circle, which advanced closer and closer to their target, rotating as it went. The rider closest to the target would slip to the side of his horse, using the animal as a shield against enemy fire, as he ducked under the horse's neck, and would let loose his arrows at a rate of up to 20 a minute. Then, as this warrior reloaded and made his way to the back of the circle, the next warrior up would loose his arrow. Dozens of warriors spinning at you in a cyclone of death, letting loose hundreds of arrows per minute, all from highly mobile, yet simultaneously protected positions, presented an absolutely terrifying spectacle, and a Gordian knot-like problem in a Gordian knot. In terms of defending against it, the Comanche's ascension to lord of the southern plains was rapid and bloody. Almost all of their former detriments, their lack of societal complexity, their itinerant lifestyle, and their complete absence of anything resembling settled agriculture became massive attributes when they harnessed the power of the horse. The motto of the vaunted British Special Air Service, the SAS, would make fine sense to the Comanche. He who dares, win. Any man who could stir up a war party for any purpose he saw fit, and who ventured out and returned with a sizable bounty, was free to do so. And this meritocracy meant that the bravest, most daring warriors held the most power and sway over their tribal politics. Now, what we have to understand about tribal warfare, both pre- and post-European contact, was that the rules of engagement that most Western societies abided by, or more accurately, claimed to abide by, were out the window. There was no quarter given and no quarter asked. Combatant age males could count on being tortured to death by a variety of means should they not win or be killed in battle. Their wives and children would, at best, be assimilated into the tribe of his enemy, or at worst, killed in the same way he was. But even in this harsh, unforgiving world, the Comanche managed to wreak a level of violence that had never been seen before. They drove out and attempted to annihilate any tribe who sought to occupy the vast swaths of southern plains that they loved, basically because of the buffalo herds being there. But we'll get into that in a second. More times than history will ever know, a quiet, sleepy village of Apache Hikoria, Utes, or Tonkawas, just to name a few, was awoken to utter carnage and destruction. Rape of female captives was the norm, as was their subjugation into sexual slavery. This, combined with the tribe's conversely unique predilection for adopting children of slain tribes into their own, although infants were usually killed outright, as they were too much trouble to keep alive, and occupied a mother who could otherwise be used for labor, resulted in one of the most impure bloodlines in all of the Native American tribes, and many refused to return home to their former lives because of the autonomy they enjoyed with the Comanche. As brutal as it was for many, the Comanche world offered an unprecedented level of freedom. But what did this new world revolve around? In a word, buffalo. The buffalo were quite literally the lifeblood of the plains. They provided meat, yes, hundreds of pounds per animal. But their hides also provided the leather for clothing and teepees. Their dung provided the fuel for fires on the timberless plains. We'll be sure to cover the buffalo in depth in the future, but suffice to say, they were nearly everything. They were the entire world on the plains. Control of the land meant control of the buffalo. You wanted to control this territory because it had so many buffalo. And control of the horses meant control of the land, because you could be so mobile and so dangerous. And the Comanche had more horses than any other tribe. Being the most powerful, southernmost tribe, they were a filter for all of the horses that made their way north from the Spanish territories. Remember the three most important things in business? Location, 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 location. Where a northern tribe chief may have several dozen horses, a Comanche chief would have several hundred, maybe 1,000 or more. All of these would be customarily slaughtered upon his death to accompany him into the next world. Think about what a grisly business killing hundreds of horses with clubs, knives, and lances would be. And stop thinking about it, because it's kind of a bummer. But the Comanche didn't just control the land. They controlled the trade route. Different bands of Comanches controlled different areas. The Panatica controlled central Texas and the prairies up into the Texas Panhandle. The Amparica occupied North Texas and southern Colorado. The Cohati occupied parts of New Mexico, Kansas, and Colorado. The Maconie controlled parts of northern Texas and Oklahoma. And the Cozoteca ran the Canadian River Valley in Oklahoma. They turned out to be incredibly adept entrepreneurs. An entire subculture had arisen in New Mexico around trading with the Comanches. They were called the Comancheros, and their position of coexistence with the Comanche was not unheard of, as other tribes like the Kiowa and Cheyenne and several Texas pioneers had brokered similar peaceable deals throughout the years. But it was rare, and as the United States, Mexico, and eventually Texas began to expand, outbreaks of violence would become more and more frequent. So frequent and so ferocious, in fact, that the entire reason Texas land was made available to American settlers in the first place was that Mexico intended to install a buffer zone of white Texas settlers on the frontier in order to absorb major Comanche attacks before they got into Mexico and closer to the capital. And while you might wonder what danger someone in Mexico City was in from a Comanche warrior in this central Texas hill country, the answer was they were in quite real danger, and quite immediate danger. The Comanche could cover hundreds of miles in a matter of days in waterless, nearly featureless territory, and disappear into vast expanses just as fast as they had arrived. The settlers in Texas also presented the first real military challenge to the Comanche since their ascension to the southern plains. Though at first most were simply fodder for the Comanche war machine. Any encroachment on the Comanche land was treated as a capital offense. The levels of brutality and aggression in Texas were unlike anything the settlers had seen before. Where they were from, in the hills of Kentucky, Virginia, Arkansas, and Tennessee. The timber and topography ruled out this type of warfare. Single-shot muzzle-loading rifles and pistols were indeed powerful weapons when fired en masse or from entrenched positions. But out on the open plains, there was nowhere to hide. One shot every 60 seconds spelled almost certain doom for anyone unlucky or foolhardy enough to be caught by Comanches in Comanche land. They especially hated land surveyors. They knew what the surveyor's business was, and their plying of their trade in what the Spanish now referred to as Comancheria made them targets for perhaps the most vicious attacks on the entire frontier. Many a young surveyor was scalped alive, or gutted, or tied down and covered with hot coals, or suffered any other number of horrible deaths. But what the Comanche did not anticipate was the persistence of the settlers. They continued to arrive, and as the violence intensified and Texas gained its independence, a new breed of intruders stalked the hill countries and roamed the open prairies. Like the Comanche, they were cultural pragmatists, ardent minimalists, and they loved nothing in life so much as violence. They were the Texas Rangers, and their arrival in Comancheria would spell the beginning of the end for the Comanche Empire. But for all intents and purposes, even in the latter half of the 1800s, the Comanche were not only a power, but in some cases at the height of their powers. They were not only known, not only respected, they were feared. It was near suicide to venture into Comancheria, but the Rangers would continue to do so. And as they developed their fighting style and the Comanche continued to expand their empire, the stage would be set for the bloodiest conflict in Texas history. But that is a story for another time. Thank you for tuning into History at the OK Corral. And if you like this topic and want to learn more and find even more podcasts about history, conspiracies, music, news, sports, and entertainment, check out the All Damn Night Podcast Network at alldamnight.com. You can browse lots of content for free and sign up for unlimited bonus content, which is hours and hours more of deep dives on the topics that you know and love, all for only $5 a month. You get a week free trial if you sign up today. Satisfaction is absolutely guaranteed, or you can cancel anytime. Check it out today at alldamnight.com.